Welcome, everyone, to the first fireside chat of the year. Today's DZone 2023 Preview DevOps Edition. We'll be discussing the latest trends and topics in software development today and how we see them unfolding as we go through this next year. We're pretty excited to get started, but I did want to mention that you can share this and see all of our on-demand events by going to dzone.com/events. My name is Jesse, the Chief Technologist here at DZone, and I'll be our moderator today. I'm pleased to be here with a panel of experts and excited to get started. So let me go ahead and introduce who we have today. First up, Alan Hahn, Director of Software Strategy at Lockheed Martin. Hey, Alan, welcome. Our very own expert from DZone itself, Lindsay Smith, our Senior Publications Manager. Hey, Lindsay. Kellen Gorman, Oracle SME on the Cloud Architecture Engineering team at Microsoft. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're as excited to be here as I am. This is going to be great.
Thanks.
So to get us started, we want to talk about several different big topics that are affecting our developers today. First up, CI/CD. So think Kubernetes, SRE, tools, processes, and how that stuff has been affecting developers today and going forward. So one of the big things, Alan, you've contributed to our Kubernetes content on DZone. You're a well-known, well-respected expert in the space. Tell me a little bit about how Kubernetes has evolved over the past year, just to get us started.
Yeah, it's been exciting, and it's been a privilege to be along for the journey with all the people that have worked on it. I think what I've seen is as the core has become more stable, the basic APIs, the basic constructs are pretty mature and pretty stable at this point. You're seeing a lot more ways in which people can get started on Kubernetes, through value-added things that sit on top of it, through, whether it's a graphical user environment, a web interface, or it's in a low-code, no-code environment that uses Kubernetes under the covers, but the people who are using it don't have to know that it's based on Kubernetes. Or operators that make it much easier to deploy and maintain things on top of that platform. It's moving from this thing that I got to learn a bunch of details about to this thing that's just kind of there and invisible, and it's a platform and I run on it. And maybe only some of the time do I have to like delve into the details of how that platform works.
So, and we've even shortened the name, I think, and Lindsay, maybe you can talk about this. I've heard it K8S. Like we used to do internationalization as I18N. What's up with that? Are people like using that everywhere? I mean, you see that in the community.
Yeah, I mean, most articles, the first reference, we'll have them spell it out, but even our editorial standards, we spell it as K8S. It's very common, and I've always pronounced it Kates, and maybe that's wrong. But I just spend most of my time reading it versus talking about it. So,
got it.
Alan, you might need to correct me here.
I say Kates all the time, so okay. I don't know if I count as an authority, but you have my stamp of approval.
I can't. I'm kind of old. I don't know. My engineering in myself can't bring myself to say Kates. I have to say Kubernetes, the whole thing. Kellen, what do you have a preference one way or another?
I actually was saying K8s. So I've got a third option for it. Yeah. And I usually, because I do these huge relational systems, I usually use data pods at the storage level. So I'm using it in a whole different way than most other folks.
That's amazing. So as we talk about usage, thanks for bringing us back, right? Regardless of how the nomenclature is, we still have to figure out the value that this thing is giving to us. And, is Kubernetes really just the stuff? I've got a question from our publications team, actually. It says, is there a hype cycle associated with Kubernetes? Like if you've ever seen any of the Gartner or Forrester, some of their reports, there's this, hype cycle, and then it goes into the trough of disillusionment after it doesn't answer all of our hopes and dreams and gets us back out. Do you think it's going to plateau? And Alan, why don't you kick us off with that one?
Sure. I mean, I think you said it exactly right? That trough of delusionment comes because it doesn't answer all of our hopes and dreams, because what technology could, right? So, when it became, I think people went from, I can run practically anything on Kubernetes, which may be true, to therefore Kubernetes will solve all of the problems that I have with my application, which is not so true, right? I mean, scaling to a large extent is still very complicated, and Kubernetes gives you the tools to help solve that problem, but it can't solve it all by itself. Reliability at the application level, that's just hard, and it's going to continue to be hard. And a lot of what we do in software engineering and in software application development and in all of the technologies we work with, there's a reason that it's hard to stand up a system that can stand up to millions of users and deal with failure and deal with networks that don't always work the way we want. And we can't wish away that complexity, but it is nice to have a tool that at least will help us take steps towards solving that problem. But yeah, it's never going to be a silver bullet.
And I'm kind of interested on Kellen's perspective. You've used RDBMS, relational database management systems. I am a DB2 expert running on AS400 and OS390 from back in the day. So I feel you. I've got it. You said how you're using K8s or K8s or Kubernetes, however you want to say it. Tell us a little bit about your unique application over there at Microsoft.
Yeah, so a lot of these multi-tier systems that are moving to the cloud, if you were to say, hey, we're going to put it into, Kubernetes, we're going to actually containerize it and move it over with that, they'd probably laugh at you. They absolutely try, but it can't scale to meet the needs. At the same time, high IO, I'm a high IO workload. We have found incredible success using Kubernetes to create data pods across ephemeral storage, ephemeral disk, and knit that all together and get very high IO. So it's just using the tool for the right job. And for the right job for us, it's meeting those high IO needs. It may not be for scaling in the way that you may think it is, but it's scaling in a different way.
Right. That's awesome. And on the disillusionment side, Lindsay, are you seeing any of that? I mean, is there a sentiment change from the community perspective, or do you feel like people are still just gung-ho Kubernetes?
I would say the prevalence has actually increased so much this year in terms of the content coverage. So we have an annual Kubernetes trend report, but I'm finding that we're having more and more topic coverage around Kubernetes in our other trend reports. Like we've got our integration microservices trend report coming out in March, and the DevOps report coming out next month. I mean, it's touching every single topic, and it seems to be becoming even more prevalent if that felt possible. But yeah, and I will say, just going back to some of the stuff you guys mentioned about, it's the tool, but you have to have the right use case and right implementation. I think as a sort of shameless plug to the content on DZone, but we've got a lot of great content, especially for publications. Alan actually wrote our Getting Started with Kubernetes rough card, which is a great resource. We've got a lot of stuff on there about the implementation side that I also just want to mention, because I think those are great resources for, people who are assessing their use case, things like that. But I just see it becoming more and more prevalent.
Okay, so not at the top. We're not at the top of the hype cycle for you.
No.
Okay, still climbing. So, and thank you for the practical advice, right? Tens of millions or whatever visiting DZone every year can't all be wrong, right? There you go. There's another plug. But I do want to pull it back to a little bit of forward-looking stuff. So, Alan, do you think we're going to continue to rise this year? And if so, what do you think is going to drive that? I mean, there's clearly a lot of adoption if it's bleeding into all these other reports and everybody's talking about it. So what do you think is going to happen over the next year?
Yeah, it's funny, when we think about what success looks like for a technology, at some level, it's becoming invisible. And especially for Kubernetes at the end of the day is an infrastructure technology. It's a platform on which you run things. We know that Linux is successful because there's just this expectation that, kind of wherever you are, there it is. And it's running underneath, a lot of stuff that we don't even think about. I think there's a decent chance that you'll see the same thing with Kubernetes. You'll see it, I can, and just to mix up the naming convention based on K8s, you've also got, small things like Minikube or K3s, that are ways to run Kubernetes in small scale environments where we previously couldn't do that. It's just a step toward it becoming an invisible platform on which, exactly as Kellen said, the right applications can run, the right kinds of use cases can be met.
Okay. Well, we have a question from one of our DZone community members. Dylan, what's your question?
I wanted to know if there was something out there that would eventually replace Kubernetes as the tool of choice. Thanks.
Alan.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You always want to be looking for the next thing, right? I remember like back before I started doing Kubernetes stuff, we were, us Java programmers were super excited about things like OSGI, and for much the same reason, right? It was all about modularity and being able to make small microservices. And I think if we look at the length of time that these cycles take, I don't think you have to be worried about something replacing Kubernetes in 2023 or in 2024, right? I think what you'll see instead is more interest in things that build on top of it, that treat it as that always available platform. Now, looking further out, as those new use cases show up, as those new technologies that ride on top of Kubernetes come about, you may see the opportunity to switch it out underneath for something else. But at that point, it will be because, over time, it kind of slowly became replaced or less relevant, as opposed to like, the K9S comes along and all of a sudden K8S is obsolete, right? I just don't see that.
That's awesome. I can't even imagine what that extra letter would be in there. So I'm just going to skip that. As we go through this, Kubernetes, we talk about kind of being more on the right-hand side of any of your flow diagrams, more towards the end. I want to, if you pardon my pun, shift our attention more left to talk about this whole shift left thing. It's, as a developer, and I've said this before, I have a 19-year-old developer that'll be graduating soon, and he'll be coding. And the idea of the whole idea of shifting left and shifting more of the responsibility of the pipeline up cycle to the developers, it's an interesting idea. But pushing up DevOps work in QA for, test-driven development, all of that kind of stuff, we're supposed to be getting better quality, finding problems faster, lower cost. But is it healthy, right? And Lindsay, you've got a unique perspective on this. Some developers, and then we'll go to Kellen. But do you think this is a healthy thing? Are there problems going to sit under the surface here that could blow up this year?
Yeah, I personally love the dialogue around shift left. I think everyone kind of has a slightly different take on it, depending on who you talk to. And a lot of our readers will kind of share that in one side or the other. But I think the one thing that has proven the most consistent, regardless of where people sort of stand on it, is that the traditional approach to the SDLC, like performance, security, all of that happening later, seems to be outdated. And that's the consistent theme that I've seen in the articles and things that we feature. But we have tried to really tap into those conversations in our content. And I will just a little teaser for next month's DevOps Trend Report. We do have an article, Shift Left, is it a pipeline dream? Excuse my pun, but we'll be exploring that. And we'll talk about, is it too idealistic? Is it practical? What are the benefits? And we've got a great author writing that. So definitely check that one out. But I think it's a good dialogue. And I think overall there is the consensus that the traditional model is outdated.
For me, I'm more data ops than I am even DevOps. I've taught DevOps classes, but my concern always is that everybody seems to have a data ops manifesto these days. And yet, as we develop and go down the line, I'm on the production side. And many times I'm not seeing that in production. You're not seeing that quality assurance. You may not see the quality of data. People aren't thinking data governance. They're just trying to get it to the end line and not looking at the sources of the data that they may be getting. And that quality isn't actually there. I think a lot of times we miss steps, and it may be because they are out of date. Some of those policies and understanding of how fast development is expected to move. So it is a significant problem. I think that from the very beginning, if you're not automating and having that part of that pipeline, it's going to be a problem too. And that all teams, that culture, everybody's kind of in sync with each other. So that's what I've seen with most of the customers that I've worked with. And I think we need to kind of step it back and start to think again about, is everybody culturally on board?
that everybody is moving in the same direction at the same speed, and that you are, when you see successes, that you are, tracking those as well as your lessons learned.
There you go. So great question. I'm gonna follow up with Alan. I'm gonna give you a little harder one. So based on what Kellen's saying, are we shifting left to put more stuff on the developers just because the other teams further down the pipeline are failing?
No, I wouldn't put it that way at all. I think the purpose of shifting left is really to get the feedback that normally would have taken the development teams 3 months or 6 months or 9 months to hear, and to make that happening on a continuous basis. Now, if you try to shift activities left, whether it's data standards and governance, or it's security standards, or it's testing, and you try to meld that into the process, but you try to just say, okay, that just means it's the dev team's job. For one thing, you are piling too much on the dev team, and then for another, they don't really have the necessary expertise to be able to do that right. So that the core idea of DevOps from the beginning was always about cross-functional teams. It was always about everybody bringing their expertise and then having that kind of systems mindset. So if you're doing shift left the right way, you've still got the data experts working the data governance. You've got the security experts as part of the process working the security standards. You've got people who are good at testing, kind of continuously working alongside the dev team testing. And and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are delivering more things in a given interval, because you still got to code it. It still takes time, but it does mean that you're delivering maybe more consistently, and your lead times shorten. You're not expecting dev productivity to go to 3x just because we shifted left. But what we are expecting is more consistency, and we're expecting fewer cases where we don't discover until we get all the way out into production that we have just this major issue that now we don't know how to solve.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about it. Lindsay, as you said, this is a more popular topic. It's starting to come up. We're going to do some things on the DZone side. I'm excited to talk about it, right? From a developer and development manager perspective that I've had in my history. It's been a hot topic ever since even before it had a name. It's been a hot topic. And so now that people are talking about it, I think we'll get to hear a lot more feedback. So I'm pretty excited. One more question here, and this one comes from our publications team. Are there any unexpected areas in which you've seen this methodology, this shift left, be implemented? Like something outside the norm?
In our space, in the kind of government military space, we actually use the term DevSecOps as much as more than we use the term DevOps, because that was like, okay, security's got to be in there. Right. But then, I think our customer is really realizing it's not just security and operations. We also have concepts like safety critical. We have what we call airworthiness if it's an airborne platform. And so the Air Force has actually coined the term DevStar, which good name, bad name, but it's supposed to get the idea that that asterisk in there stands for safety and security and data governance, and it stands for operations. And it's kind of all of those things are supposed to be shifted left. And that's like taking what was already a hard job. DevOps by itself was already hard. And then you say, now throw everything else in there, and we just made it, 20 times harder. But I think they're right that's ultimately where we would like to be.
Awesome. That's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. So I do have one more question that's come in from our DZone community. So Jenna, what is your question?
Curious about what are the challenges that we're seeing with everyone moving to the cloud, and how can we alleviate some of that responsibility for our developers in this shift left movement?
A lot of our users, and I talk about, old Oracle relational systems, and that like these Hyperion and S-based users, they're very fluent when it comes to Excel. I mean, they were doing full analytics in Excel, which is just beyond me. And we'll introduce them because, we're Microsoft, we'll introduce them to things like Power BI, and they come in there and the blade is the same and the ribbon down the left, it's all the same. And suddenly they're doing analytics, and the developers are going, I don't have to code all of that analytics. This is great. So we start to introduce them to the machine learning and the AI tools that, again, same thing. They start to pick up some of the weight and they take it off of the developers. From there, then the customer, those it's usually the CIO says, wouldn't it be great if we had a data lake? And all of a sudden you have developers doing Databricks, they're doing Synapse, they're doing more of the heavy lifting. But as it shifts left, not everything shifts left. More times those low code, no code, options can be used by your users who are less technical, and they can provide more value. We've already done the research where you find that if you can just get 10% more value out of the data you have, it can result in millions of dollars of revenue. We know this. This is all there all the time. So getting those folks to all pitch in helps the shift left go a little easier.
Awesome. And as one of those old guys, right? I'm an old Java developer from the late 90s. I have a Duke plushie from Java 1 1999 right over there. Alan, I'll show you after the show. But I did have a question that brings up a question, right? Low code, no code environments. I'm super happy. I love the new Power App stuff that Microsoft has. There's 50 other ones out there. But Lindsay, this question is going to be yours. Are they developers at that point? Like if I'm just coding Excel functions, does that make me a developer?
I struggle with this question because I think I could upset a lot of people. I also know I will rely on what I believe our audience often defines it as, but I'd love for someone to.
That's safe.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to the code. I think if you are a programmer, a coder, to me, that is a true making of a developer. But is that wrong? That's how I've interpreted it. And that's how our audience seems to interpret it as well. When you see these articles and the stuff our community is saying, they seem to, have really, really strong opinions around it. And I think that's a tough question.
All right, Alan, what do you think?
I think it's great that our industry has always been relatively low barriers to entry, right? You can go out and you can, do a little bit of JavaScript and you can, make a website, right? And I think that's super cool. I think, our responsibility has to be, let's help those folks understand, even if it's like in my industry, that might be a systems engineer that's writing a MATLAB script to try out an algorithm, right? Nice. But let's help them understand all of the hard lessons that we've learned from writing software the wrong way, from not having the right processes in place, from not having really solid version control, not having a really solid CI pipeline. Let's help them understand why those things are important. We can turn those people into developers. I think a lot of the reason that we all shudder collectively when we hear like, oh, I have this wonderful Excel spreadsheet that does all this analysis, or I have a Microsoft Access database that's doing this for me, is because we know it's probably an unmaintainable mess, right? And so like, how can we help people who are maybe aspiring developers or developer adjacent, become fully fledged and follow those best practices? I think would be great.
See, I love that because Lindsay, I was one of those guys in the 90s that took one of the first Java courses at school in conjunction with C and C++. And the guy who I will still say is my best friend today said, that's not coding. That's not developing. You don't have to do memory management. You don't have to, worry about pointers and all of that stuff. It was a huge deal, right? Because some people find identity in that. And I love, Alan, how you said it's going to be up to us to try to help grow that next generation of developers. How do we pass on that knowledge of these relational database systems, right? Oracle 12c. How do we, get all of this stuff done and pass this stuff down? Because let's face it, a lot of the code in the world today is already written. Most developers don't write a whole lot of fresh new code. They're editing stuff, these massive systems that already exist. So I love the idea of low barriers to entry, and we should do everything else that we need to do to be able to help these people onboard and be good developers with the rest of us. I love it. I love it. Kellen, any final thoughts before I switch topics on us?
I think it takes a village. Everybody has a valuable contribution, and I don't know if I see a developer as a developer. Everybody has their role. I don't confuse, somebody who's working in Excel with development, but I've also seen some pretty advanced formulas built into cells. So I'll give them credit for that.
So one of the other things is we're kind of switching gears really quick. We've seen low code and no code go hand in hand with automation, right? And even take over some of the conversation of low code and no code just to replace things with automated processes, automated tools. So there is going to be a new automated testing trend report. Lindsay, you want to say something? Am I allowed to say that? Why don't you say that? That way I don't get in trouble.
So we are actually going to do 2 reports this year that'll be somewhat around the no and low code space. And I think they really put it in good terms in terms of like the stuff that most interest our audience around no and low code. So we'll have our automated testing trend report, which is launching, I believe, in August. And then we also, a little bit sooner in April, are launching a development at scale report. And that'll focus on many different aspects of development, but especially around scalability, which I think is also really relevant when it comes to no and low code. And so, yeah, we're really excited about both of those. But you are correct. We will be talking about automated testing. And that is, I believe, our second trend report on automated testing. We didn't do one last year, but we got a lot of requests and interest in it. So we're bringing it back this year.
One of the other topics that I did want to touch on before we start wrapping things up is artificial intelligence / machine learning, right? No, not really sure if we have real artificial intelligence, but ChatGPT is exploded, millions and millions of users in record time in just a matter of weeks. I have to admit, I'm one of them. And it's a pretty cool app. I've used it to do a few really nifty things. It can generate some code. But I also know, Kellen, from the Microsoft perspective, we have GitHub Copilot, which is pretty slick. And I've seen some of the instances where you can ask it to generate an algorithm and it'll spit out some code. Now, it's not 100%, but do you think over the next year that use of these, artificial intelligence algorithms that are built off of real code and real learning models are going to grow in popularity? And, Alan, I'd love to hear from you first, and then Kellen, like, is this something that's really going to help developers write code faster?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's in some sense, it's, another step beyond what a Google search did, right? Like, I think at the beginning of my career, which was frankly a long time ago, when it was hard to look through the documentation and find the right API calls, find the, the way to invoke the libraries. Now, we search Google first, and I think, this is a step forward where we can say, I want to remember how to do this in this programming language. Well, maybe I don't have to store that in my brain anymore because I know it's easily accessible through Copilot or a ChatGPT. I think, what we still have to remember is, and this goes back to what we said about who's a developer, like one of the things that makes you a professional developer is the ability to understand, given this problem in the real world, what is the way to structure it in code? What are the things I have to watch out for from a performance standpoint, from a security standpoint? It's going to be much harder for the AI tools to be able to answer those questions for you. That's still generally going to be the domain of the human being, I think, for quite a bit of time to come.
Yep, I agree too. Kellen, what do you think?
I've had I've had fun with both Copilot as well as ChatGPT. I put them through interviews for positions on our team just to test them out. One of them I would have hired, one I wouldn't have. I'm not telling you which one, but we've also tested it and we had it write documentation for us, the boring, tedious parts. Works very, very well.
Nice.
And then among an internal group, we discussed about it writing SQL. And Copilot did a better job.
Oh, yeah.
Copilot did do a much better job. And people were asking, can it do this? It absolutely can. Is it technically, valid? Most of the time it wasn't using, it would use like SQL 98 versus PL SQL functions. It didn't understand any of that stuff. So yeah, you would still need your expertise to do it. Is it going to get there? Absolutely. Absolutely will. So it's really interesting where it's going. And I like the idea that I could take some of the tedious tasks from someone like myself. And I am on a team that finding somebody to write documentation, almost impossible. If I could make an AI do it, I'll do that. Yeah, I'm there.
Awesome. All right. Kellen's on board. Lindsay, from your perspective, what do we got going on, out in the community from an AI and machine learning perspective?
Yeah, I think one thing I guess I'll mention, since we're focused, especially around the DevOps side of things, is we actually just relaunched our 2022 enterprise AI report the end of last year. It went out in February, but then we relaunched it in December. And we actually wanted to add some additional articles and content and things around it because we felt like it had evolved so much by the end of the year. I know we explored a lot around ML ops, and we had an article featured there that I definitely recommend going and reading it. It was all about, maturity assessments, how to select the right path according to your use case, a lot of really interesting stuff like that. And that's one thing I wanted to maybe bring to this discussion was just that topic. And I think there's a lot that's happening, and it's really fun to launch a report at the beginning of the year and then realize there's still so much more we can include and relaunch it again, which was really, we don't often do that, but when we do, it's really fun to see the change.
That's awesome. From that perspective, there's so much on all these topics, right? We're going to run out of time here quick. And I do have one other question I want to get to y'all. But we could do several different fireside chats just like this. We do it every week. Everything's changing so fast and so rapidly. I did want each of your perspectives though on one final question, if I can, as we're closing out. And that's, as we think about the trends that we've discussed, right? Did we miss any in your mind, or anything that is top of mind that we want the developers, technical professionals, architects, managers, leaders who are going to watch this to take away from, like something that you think is going to be in the forefront of 2023, and then anything that they need to do to prepare for that thing that's coming? And Alan, again, I'll let you go first, if you will, and give us your perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like first is the hard one for this one because I gotta think quickly. But I guess, and this is maybe not a new trend, but it's something, and as you said, that's accelerating. There is more technology out there than any one person is ever going to be able to become even familiar with, let alone expert in the course of an entire career. So, there's fun stuff out there. It's, Copilot and ChatGPT, those are fun. And, definitely, absolutely be exploring new and fun things. But, don't be afraid to recognize that you have a niche, you have a particular set of skills that got you to where you are. And, don't be afraid that suddenly in the course of the next 12 months, like your skills are going to just become obsolete and, you're going to be just out on your ear, right? Like while there's new stuff happening all the time, like Jesse said a while ago, there's a lot of code out there that's already been written, and there are great jobs across our industry, even working on all of that code. Just don't program in COBOL if you can help it.
Awesome. All right, Kellen, what do you think?
The joke about the person that ends up being frozen and is brought back in the year 2098 because they're a COBOL programmer. So it is the truth. It is the truth. And I know that as that RDBMS dinosaur farmer. Not just finding a niche and doing the things that are fun, but to kind of play on what Alan already said, is that seeing what is needed in your company, in the business, in the industry. That's the reason I started moving all these relational systems, was because they needed to move to get to where companies wanted to be. And I think that's really important, is looking around. Don't just fall for the buzzwords, fall for what is needed, what is required, what builds the business, and where the business can build off of those foundations. And I think that's really important. I hear a lot about multi-cloud in theory versus reality. Our network is the last bottleneck. If somebody doesn't address that soon, and machine learning, all of that is just, we got to take care of our foundations. So I'm going to say that again. I am a big person about, we've got to fix the network. So any of you network admins out there, get to work. I'm with you. I'm back behind you. I'll back you all the way. So
absolutely love it. From our very own DZone team, Lindsay, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think you guys, I think I just want to bounce off of the things you guys shared. And I love the focus on, not being intimidated by what's changed or what's new, but to really embrace that. And I hope that in 2023, DZone can be a source for that of, if you're new to a topic or new to something, that we can really be the path there along the way. And, I hope we can feature all the content that folks want to see around those emerging topics or the things that they're embarking on this year. And yeah, I think that's a really great way to close it out. I think that's, why DZone's here, and that's what we aim to do. So I love it.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, Kellen, for joining us today. It's been so much fun exploring these topics with y'all. Thank you to everyone out there viewing us in internet land. We're so appreciative of you spending your time with us today. And we hope that you walked away with something that you can use every day in your own jobs, whether you're a developer or a technical leader or a manager. We hope that you do have fun, as Alan said, have fun with the technologies, work on your foundations, and also visit dzone.com. 10 million unique visitors a month can't all be wrong, right? So we're going to keep everything up to date on dzone.com so that you'll be in the know for all the trends throughout the year. The last thing is, if you enjoyed this and you want to share it with someone else, we would love for you to go to dzone.com/events right here, and you can see this and all of our on-demand events. The last thing is, please, if you will, stay on for just another minute or two. We'd love for you to take a quick survey. We always want to be improving these events for you. So if you could give us a couple of more minutes of your time and fill out that survey, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks.